When did I stop being a mother and become a burden? That question still echoes in my mind, the day I realized my own family had already decided my fate. It started on a quiet Sunday morning. The smell of tea filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. I remember humming softly while arranging breakfast, the way I always did. But then, I heard my son's voice, low, hesitant, careful. "She's not herself anymore," he said. "It's time we put her somewhere safe." At first, I thought I'd misheard. My hands froze midair, the teacup trembling between my fingers. Then came her voice, calm, deliberate, soaked in sugar and poison. "It's for the best, Daniel. We can't take care of her forever. You've done enough." Those words didn't just hurt. They hollowed me out. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there, hidden behind the doorway, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. My son, my only child, the boy I carried through storms and sickness, was now talking about putting me away. I wanted to walk in and scream, "How dare you!" But something stopped me, shame. A deep, unbearable shame. Because part of me thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I really am a burden now. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, they both jumped. I'll never forget the look on Daniel's face. Guilt, panic, then relief as his wife spoke before he could. She smiled so effortlessly, as if rehearsed for this moment. "Mama," she said softly, "we were just talking about a nice place, somewhere peaceful, where you can rest. You've done so much for us." I stared at her, at those perfect teeth behind that gentle tone, and for the first time, I saw what I had refused to see for years. She wasn't trying to care for me. She was trying to remove me, and my son, he wasn't stopping her. Betrayal feels strange when it comes from the person you'd die for. It's not just pain, it's confusion, disbelief, a kind of grief that doesn't end. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe Daniel loved me the same way I loved him. But when I asked quietly, "Why now?" he looked away. "It's just temporary, Ma. You'll like it there." Temporary? That word broke me. I remember walking back to my room, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the doorknob. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of my husband on the wall. His smile felt like a memory from another lifetime. I whispered, "Do you see what's happening to us?" But the room stayed silent. For hours, I replayed that conversation in my head. Every word, every pause, every fake smile. By evening, I wasn't sad anymore. I was one empty. And that emptiness slowly turned into something sharper. Defiance. If they wanted me gone, they would get what they wanted, but not the way they planned. That night, after they went to bed, I opened my old wooden trunk. Inside was everything I'd kept hidden. My passport, the deed to the house, a small pouch of savings I'd never told anyone about. I ran my fingers over the faded edges, feeling the weight of every sacrifice that built this home. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd just sit there, waiting for them to decide where I belonged. But they'd forgotten who raised them, who survived widowhood, poverty, and the kind of loneliness that could kill a person. As I folded clothes into my small suitcase, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older, yes, but my eyes still had fire. "They think I'm done," I whispered to myself. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." But then came the fear. What if I really couldn't make it on my own anymore? What if they were right, that I was slipping, that I needed help? I sat there trembling, torn between pride and panic. The walls of that house, the one I built, suddenly felt foreign, like I was already a guest inside my own life. Just before dawn, I walked past their room one last time. Through the crack in the door, I saw them sleeping peacefully. Her head on his chest, his arm around her. They looked happy. I wondered if they'd even notice I was gone. Outside, the sky was still dark. The streetlights hummed softly, and the air smelled like rain. I stood there, suitcase in hand, one last look at the home I'd built. A home that no longer wanted me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't wait for anyone's permission. I walked away, slowly, quietly, my slippers brushing against the pavement. But what happened next? That part still gives me chills. Because when I turned the corner, I realized I wasn't as invisible as I thought. Someone had seen me leave, and that's when I knew. My disappearance wouldn't go unnoticed. They wanted to send me away. But what they didn't know was that I had already planned my own disappearance. I thought love protected you from betrayal, but I was wrong. That week after hearing their plan, I lived like a ghost in my own home. Every sound, every whisper, every closed door made me question what else I didn't know. I would sit in the living room pretending to read, while Daniel's wife spoke softly on the phone in the next room. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I recognized the tone, that careful, performative kindness she used when she was hiding something. One night, as I walked past their room, I heard her say, "Yes, the papers are ready. He'll sign once she's settled, the papers." Those two words clung to me like a shadow, but before I let anger consume me, I needed to remember who I once was. Not the trembling woman they saw now, but the woman who built everything they were trying to take. I opened the old chest under my bed and took out the faded photo of my husband, Thomas. His arm was wrapped around me, our faces dusted with flour from baking bread in the half-finished kitchen. That house, this house, had been our dream. Every brick had a story, every crack in the wall carried laughter. Every bill paid came from the sweat of our hands. When Thomas passed, I promised him I'd keep it standing, for Daniel, for our family, for the love we built inside these walls. And for years I did. Through loneliness, debt, and grief, I kept that promise. Until the day I realized the people I built this home for were the ones tearing it apart. The first sign came small, almost invisible. A utility bill, unpaid, though I remembered handing Daniel the money for it weeks before. Then another, and another, each stamped final notice. I confronted him gently, afraid of sounding paranoid. "Daniel, did something happen with the bills?" He laughed it off, ruffling my hair like I was a child. "You worry too much, Ma. I've got it handled." But that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the kitchen for water and saw him at the table whispering with his wife. Papers spread before them. His voice was low, tight. "She can't know yet," he said. I froze in the hallway again, just like before. My body went cold, my breath caught in my throat. She replied softly, "Don't worry. By the time she finds out, it'll be done." Done? What would be done? I wanted to scream, but fear kept me quiet. Fear of hearing the truth out loud. The next morning, I decided to search, not out of mistrust, but survival. I waited until they both left for the day. My hands shook as I opened the drawer in the study, the one Daniel always kept locked. It wasn't locked that day. Inside, there were folders, bank statements, receipts, legal forms. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My name was printed on half the papers, but the signature underneath wasn't mine. I traced the pen marks, heart pounding. The handwriting looked close, but not enough. My son, or someone, had been signing for me. On one document, I saw the title, Medical Consent Form. The date was recent. The words, transfer of guardianship, made my blood run cold. What would you do if your own child planned to take everything from you? That night, I sat in the dark, holding those papers in my lap, my tears drying before they fell. Every memory with Daniel replayed in my mind. His first steps, the nights he cried when his father died, the way he used to call me, my brave mama. When did that boy disappear? When did love turn into this quiet theft? Still, I told myself maybe there was another explanation. Maybe the lawyer had made a mistake. Maybe Daniel was protecting me, not betraying me. So the next morning, I took the risk. I called the one person I still trusted, Mr. Patel, our family lawyer. I told him I needed to see him privately. When I arrived, his assistant led me in with a confused look, like I was there for the wrong reason. I placed the documents on his desk, and for a long time, he said nothing. He read each line slowly, his brow tightening, his eyes flickering with something that looked like pity. Finally, he looked up and said, "Where did you get these?" I told him the truth, and from my own house. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temple. "I wish you hadn't found them this way," he murmured. Then quietly, "These are power of attorney documents. They give Daniel full control over your finances, medical decisions, and property." My chest tightened. "But I didn't sign anything." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's what I was afraid of." For a moment, the room spun. My world, my family, everything I thought I still had, started collapsing in silence. I whispered, he wouldn't do this to me. He wouldn't. But the look on Mr. Patel's face said everything. When I left his office, the sky was gray, heavy with rain. I walked without direction, feeling each drop sting my skin. By the time I got home, my clothes clung to me, and my mind was drowning in disbelief. But disbelief turned into rage when I noticed something new. The way Daniel looked at me. The overly sweet tone, the rehearsed affection. He brought me tea and asked about my day like a nurse checking on a patient, not a son talking to his mother. And his wife? She'd started touching my arm whenever she spoke, tilting her head like she pitied me. Pity. That was the final insult. One evening, while clearing the dining table, I saw an envelope slip from her purse. My instincts took over. I picked it up, a property transaction receipt, half folded. My name was on it again, in that same forged signature. The amount listed made me dizzy. It was everything. Everything Thomas and I had built. Everything I'd spent a lifetime protecting. I sat down hard, gripping the paper. My vision blurred. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I read it once, twice, a third time, hoping the words would change. They didn't. He had already sold my home. That moment shattered something in me that will never be whole again. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. I just sat there, numb, holding the proof of my son's betrayal in my trembling hands. And as the rain began to fall harder outside, I knew the woman they thought was weak, the woman they were trying to erase, was gone forever. Because they took everything from me, but they forgot one thing. I still had myself. And that's when I found the receipt, the one that proved he'd already sold my home. I didn't vanish because I was weak. I vanished because I finally understood strength. That morning, I woke before dawn. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of betrayal. My hands trembled as I packed the few things that were truly mine: a photograph, a locket, a notebook, and the receipt that had shattered my world. I didn't look back when I closed the door. That house wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, one built from the ashes of trust. At the bank, I withdrew what little money they hadn't touched. The teller asked for my ID, and when she glanced up at me with quiet pity, I almost broke down. But I smiled instead. That same gentle smile I used to give Daniel when I told him everything would be okay. This time I wasn't lying to him. I was lying to myself. Because nothing would ever be okay again. I signed the withdrawal slip with a name I hadn't used in decades. Marie Clark. My maiden name. The one I buried when I became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's fool. That day I resurrected her. The woman who once faced the world with her chin lifted, her heart open, and her mind sharp. I found a small room on the outskirts of town, one with peeling wallpaper and a window that rattled in the wind. It was perfect, anonymous, forgotten, just like me. I told the landlady I was a retired teacher, starting over after losing everything. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. That's how my new life began, with silence and the faint hum of revenge building beneath my ribs. For days I watched from a distance. I sat in the small cafe near our old house, sipping bitter coffee, pretending to read the newspaper while my eyes stayed fixed on them. I saw Daniel pacing in the driveway, yelling into his phone. I saw his wife posing in front of the gate as reporters snapped pictures. The local news called it a mystery disappearance. Heart twisted when I saw the tears in her eyes until I noticed the way she smiled right after the cameras stopped rolling. They weren't mourning me. They were performing. At night, I would replay those images over and over. How quickly they moved on. How easily they lied. They even printed flyers. My face on cheap paper, missing in bold red letters. I almost laughed. They had no idea I was watching from across the street, alive, and seeing them for what they truly were. Then something strange happened. Something that pulled me deeper into the darkness they'd created. One evening, Daniel's wife met someone, a man. I saw them through the cafe window, sitting too close, laughing too easily. His hand brushed hers and she didn't pull away. When she leaned forward, whispering something that made him grin, I realized what I was seeing. My daughter-in-law, the woman who called me mama when she wanted something, had a lover. I followed her once, from a distance. They met at a hotel on the other side of town. Cheap, hidden, the kind of place where secrets live and die quietly. I didn't feel jealousy or disgust, just a cold curiosity. How long had this been going on? Did Daniel know? Or was he too busy drowning in his own lies to see hers? The next day, I returned to my small room and opened the notebook I'd started keeping. I wrote everything: names, dates, times, even the way her eyes sparkled when she lied. The pages filled quickly. I didn't realize it then, But that notebook would become my salvation. Every night, I'd add more. Phone calls I overheard. Documents I found through public records. Bank accounts that didn't belong to me but carried my name. Piece by piece, their entire scheme unfolded in front of me like a rotten flower. The nursing home they had chosen for me, the one Daniel said would take good care of Mama, didn't exist. It was a shell company, registered under a fake address. And the owner? The same man who sat across from my daughter-in-law at that hotel cafe. That discovery nearly broke me. Not because of what it meant, but because of how deep it went. My son wasn't just lying to me. He was part of something much darker. They hadn't just tried to steal from me. They were laundering everything. My savings, my home, even my late husband's insurance. For the first time in my life, I felt something new. Not fear, not grief, but power. The kind of power that comes when a woman has nothing left to lose. I started calling from a burner phone. Posing as an investor, as a client, as anyone who could get them talking. And they did, and because greed makes people careless. I recorded every call, saved every email. I became invisible, but everywhere at once. The ghost in their machine. Sometimes I'd catch Daniel's face on the evening news, standing beside his wife, pretending to beg for my safe return. "We just want her home," he'd say, eyes glistening with fake tears. I'd lean closer to the TV and whisper, "Don't worry, Daniel. Mama's coming home soon." But what happened next left me speechless. One night, as I sat at the cafe reviewing my notes, a man approached me. I didn't recognize him, but his voice was calm, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Clark," he said softly. I froze. No one had called me that name since I left. He smiled faintly and slid a card across the table. "They think you're dead," he continued. "But if you want to stay that way, stop digging." Then he walked out before I could respond. My hands shook as I picked up the card. No name, no number. Just a small embossed logo, the same one from the forged nursing home papers. That night, I didn't sleep. My room felt smaller, colder. I checked the locks twice, 3 times. Fear crept back in, but I wouldn't let it win. I'd already lost everything once. I refused to lose myself again. Days later, I returned to my old neighborhood. But this time, I didn't go as myself. I borrowed a wig, glasses, clothes that didn't belong to me. I told the cab driver I was an insurance inspector following up on a claim. My heart pounded as the car turned into the familiar street, the one lined with trees I had planted with my own hands. When I stepped out, I saw it. My house. My garden, my life. But it didn't look like mine anymore. The flowers were gone. The paint was fading. The windows were covered. It was a shell, hollow, stripped, lifeless. I walked closer, pretending to take notes. Then I noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open. My chest tightened. I looked around, no one. The street was silent. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The air inside smelled of dust and decay. I stepped into the living room, my heart pounding, my breath shallow, and there, on the floor, lay a single envelope with my name written in Daniel's handwriting. But when I returned home in disguise, I found something waiting that changed everything. "Daniel, I forgive you." Those were the first words I said when I stood in front of my son again after 6 long months. My voice trembled just enough to sound believable. His eyes widened, his lips parted, and for a brief second, just a second, I saw guilt flash across his face. Then came the mask. That same practiced smile he always used when he wanted something. "Mom," he whispered, pretending to choke on emotion. "We thought you were gone forever." Gone. That was the word he chose. Not missing, not worried, not we were scared, just gone. Like a misplaced belonging finally returned to its owner. I looked at him, at the son I had raised with scraped hands and sleepless nights, and I smiled back. "I just needed time," I said softly, "to heal." Inside, I was screaming. Over the following days, I let them believe I was weak, fragile, forgiving, half the woman I once was. I even let my daughter-in-law fuss over me, making tea I never drank and touching my shoulder as if affection could erase betrayal. She spoke gently now, always using words like family and new beginnings. Every syllable felt like poison dipped in honey. But I nodded. I played my part. Because this time, the performance was mine. You see, forgiveness is a powerful disguise. It lowers guards, softens suspicion, and makes even the cruelest hearts exhale in relief. They thought the nightmare was over, but the truth was just beginning to wake. The invitation was my idea. I told them I wanted one last family dinner to celebrate life. Daniel hesitated, of course. He was cautious now, perhaps afraid of the ghost he'd tried to bury. But greed and pride have short memories. By the end of the week, the table was set, and the guest list was complete. They didn't know the others I'd invited. My lawyer, the detective I'd hired months ago, and two of Daniel's old friends who'd once warned me, quietly, that my son was getting involved with the wrong people. The night of the dinner, I wore the same blue dress my late husband used to love, the one Daniel once said made me look respectable. I wanted to remind him who I was before he tried to rewrite me as helpless. I walked into that dining room with steady steps, holding not food, but folders. Evidence. Truth. Printed and sealed. When Daniel opened the door, his wife gasped. "Mama," she said, forcing a smile. "You look lovely, lovely." That word almost made me laugh. I looked at her expensive jewelry, at the way her fingers fidgeted against her wine glass. She was nervous, and she should have been. Because that night wasn't about dinner. It was Judgment Day served on porcelain plates. We sat around the table, the air thick with unspoken history. My lawyer sat quietly near the end, his presence explained as a family friend. The detective pretended to be my caregiver. Daniel didn't notice or didn't care. He was too busy rehearsing his redemption act, telling stories about how grateful he was that I'd recovered. I let him talk. I watched the way his wife smiled when he lied. I even laughed at the right moments. But then when the soup bowls were cleared and the room grew quiet, I reached into my bag and pulled out the first envelope. "Daniel," I said gently. "Do you remember this?" He frowned, reaching for it. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, transfer slips, digital records showing where my savings had gone. At first, his expression didn't change. He thought it was another test of my trust. But when his eyes fell on the names, his and his wife's, the color drained from his face. "This isn't what you think," he stammered. "Then tell me," I replied, my voice calm but sharp. "Why would you transfer every cent from my account into one tied to a fake care facility?" His wife leaned forward. "Mama, please," she whispered. "You don't understand how things work now. We were only trying to— To what?" I cut her off, the first crack in my calm showing. "To protect me? Or to erase me?" The detective's voice broke the silence. He pulled out his badge and set it beside the documents. "We've been following the trail for weeks," he said. "It leads straight to both of you." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Daniel pushed his chair back, his face twisting. "You set us up!" he shouted. "You were supposed to forgive us." I looked him straight in the eyes. "I did forgive you, Daniel, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it never meant letting you destroy what your father and I built." He turned toward the others, his old friends, who now sat in stunned silence. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "She's twisting everything." But I wasn't twisting anything. I was untwisting the lies, one by one. I slid more papers across the table. Property deeds sold under false signatures, emails between his wife and her lover, proof that the nursing home they'd planned for me was nothing but a laundering front. With each document, their faces fell further into disbelief, like the walls of their world were finally collapsing. His wife tried to stand, but her legs trembled. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "We just needed a little money to fix things." "Fix what?" I asked. "Your lies? Your marriage? Your greed?" Her silence was answer enough. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The detective read their names aloud from the report, full, legal, undeniable. And for the first time, my son had nothing left to say. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, the same one that had marked birthdays, anniversaries, and now, betrayal. No one moved. No one dared breathe. The air was heavy with the weight of exposed sin. And as I looked around that table, at the wreckage of my own bloodline, I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel triumph. Just an aching sadness for the boy I once carried and the man he had become. When the detective stood to leave, he nodded once toward me. It was done. They would face what they had earned. Daniel tried one last time, his voice small, desperate. "Mom, please. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. I closed my eyes. No, Daniel. You did this to yourself. I didn't stay to watch them crumble. I walked out before the shouting began, before the tears turned to anger. The night air was cold and clean, like the world had finally exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not because justice had been served, but because truth had finally spoken louder than love. And when I woke the next morning, the news channels were buzzing. My son's face, pale, broken, flashed across every screen. Headlines screamed of fraud, elder abuse, and stolen inheritance. My daughter-in-law was led out of their home in handcuffs. The world finally saw what I had seen all along. And the next morning, their faces were on every news channel. I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son stood trial. Those were the only words running through my head as I stepped into that cold courtroom. Everything smelled of polished marble and disinfectant, but beneath it I could still feel the rot of betrayal. The benches were filled with strangers whispering about us, and the air buzzed with quiet judgment. My hands trembled as I clutched the small locket around my neck, the one he gave me when he was 8, saying, "Mama, I'll always protect you." Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. He sat there in that stiff suit, shoulders hunched, eyes cast down. Not out of shame, I think, but fear. Maybe he finally realized the kind of truth he couldn't talk his way out of. The prosecutor's voice echoed as he read the charges. Fraud, forgery, elder exploitation. Each word landed like a hammer. My daughter-in-law sat beside him, pretending to wipe her tears with a tissue that looked rehearsed. I almost pitied her. Almost. Because I could still remember her standing in my kitchen, smiling while she drained my accounts. And now that same smile trembled at the edges. But what unsettled me most wasn't their guilt. It was the emptiness in my son's face. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even blink. Just stared at the table as if he wanted to disappear inside it. When the judge called my name, my knees nearly buckled. The courtroom felt miles long as I walked to the stand. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the footsteps. My lawyer whispered, "Take your time." But how do you take time to speak about your own child's betrayal? My voice cracked at first, then steadied as I began. I didn't talk about the money, not about the property. I spoke about nights when I couldn't sleep, when I'd stare at the ceiling wondering how love could turn into something so cruel. I told them how silence becomes a disease, how mothers bury the truth to protect their children, not realizing they're burying themselves too. At one point, my son finally looked up at me, and in that single glance I saw the little boy he used to be, scared, lost, ashamed. But then he blinked, and the man who replaced him was a stranger. A stranger I'd raised. He whispered something to his lawyer, shaking his head as if to say none of it was true. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because lies sound so small in the echo of truth. The judge asked me if I forgave him, and I said forgiveness is not a gift. It's a grave you dig together. The courtroom went silent. My daughter-in-law tried her turn next. She stood up and spoke about pressure, about confusion, about how she never meant for it to go this far. She said she loved me, that she saw me as her own mother. Her voice quivered at all the right places, but her eyes were dry. The prosecutor handed her the signed documents, her signature right next to my forged one. She went pale. Her lips trembled. For the first time that day, she had no words to twist. "You don't understand," she whispered to me as she sat down. And I replied quietly, "No, you never did." The trial dragged for hours, every moment peeling another layer off my heart. Witnesses spoke. Evidence was shown. The detective described how they moved my money through fake nursing home contracts, how they planned to sell my house before I even left the hospital. I kept my eyes on the table, breathing slow, trying not to collapse under the weight of humiliation. You don't realize how fragile dignity is until it's written on court documents for everyone to read. Then came the verdict. The judge's voice was calm, almost emotionless, but to me, each syllable was thunder. Guilty on all counts. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. My son buried his face in his hands, and I felt something inside me break all over again. Not because I lost him, I had already lost him months ago, but because justice, when it finally comes, never feels like victory. It feels like mourning. Mourning the family that once existed only in your memory. Mourning the mother you used to be before you had to learn how to fight your own blood. People in the courtroom looked at me like I should have been relieved. But relief is too small a word for what I felt. It was something quieter, heavier. a kind of peace that comes after every bridge has already burned. As the officers led my son and his wife away, the chains around their wrists clinked softly, like wind chimes at a funeral. That sound still echoes in my mind sometimes. He turned once before reaching the door, and for a moment, I thought he'd finally say he was sorry. Instead, he whispered, so faintly only I could hear, "You ruined everything." And that's when I realized something far darker. He still didn't understand. He still believed love meant control. And as the door closed behind him, I knew the story wasn't over yet. The day I left that house, I didn't look back, not once. The front door clicked shut behind me like the sound of a chapter ending, not softly, but final, like a nail being driven into wood. The house that once held birthdays, laughter, and late-night lullabies had turned into a battlefield of betrayal. The walls still remembered the shouting, the lies, the sound of papers being slammed on the table. Every corner felt haunted by what we had become. I sold it without sentiment, without ceremony. When the realtor handed me the final documents, she smiled and said, "You must be excited for your new beginning." I smiled back, but inside, all I felt was empty. You see, freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes disguised as silence. I moved to a small coastal town where no one knew my name. The ocean was the first thing that didn't judge me. Every morning, I'd walk barefoot along the shore, letting the cold waves numb the parts of me that still hurt. The salt in the air stung my skin, but it also reminded me I was still alive. I rented a little cottage that smelled of seaweed and fresh paint. The neighbors waved, asked polite questions, but I never said much. How could I tell them that I'd lost everything, and yet somehow found myself again? Some nights I still dreamt of Daniel. Not the man who sat in that courtroom, but the boy who used to run down the hallway with sticky hands, shouting, "Mama, look what I made!" In my dreams, he was always smiling. And every time, I'd wake up with tears soaking the pillow. I'd tell myself I was done crying for him. But love isn't something you can turn off. It lingers even after trust is gone. It lingers like smoke after a fire. Faint, bitter, but still there. Weeks turned into months. I built new routines. Morning tea on the porch, small talk with the grocer, feeding stray cats that appeared at my door. Life became quiet, and I told myself that quiet was enough. But one afternoon, as I checked the mail, I saw it, a thick envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My hands froze. The return address was a prison. I knew immediately. My breath caught as I slid my finger under the seal. The paper smelled faintly of disinfectant and regret. It began with one line. I didn't know what she was making me do. I read it again and again, as if the words would change the longer I stared. Part of me wanted to rip it up, throw it into the sea, and pretend I never saw it. But another part, the part that still called him my son, couldn't look away. He wrote about confusion, about fear, about how he let someone else's voice drown out his own conscience. He said he wished he could undo it all, that prison had given him more clarity than freedom ever did. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But how do you forgive someone who made you feel disposable? I sat at the table for hours, staring at that letter. His handwriting shook in some places, as if written through tears. My chest ached as I remembered the little boy who used to write me notes on napkins, spelling "I love you" wrong but meaning it right. Maybe he wasn't the same man anymore. Maybe none of us were. The truth was, I didn't know whether to cry or to scream. But I did both. I cried until my throat burned, until the sound of the waves outside drowned my sobs. Then, in that fragile stillness, I finally picked up a pen. I wrote slowly, carefully, because this wasn't a reply I wanted to rush. "Daniel," I began, "I don't know how much of what you wrote is true. But I believe one thing. Silence is what destroyed us. All those times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, all those moments you hid behind lies instead of facing what you'd done. The truth doesn't destroy families. Secrets do." I paused, staring at that sentence. It felt heavier than anything I'd ever written. Because it wasn't just meant for him, it was meant for me too. I signed the letter and sealed it, knowing I'd just closed the last door that needed closing. I walked to the post office the next morning, the sun barely rising, painting the water gold. When I dropped that envelope into the box, my hands didn't shake. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim or a mother begging for love. I felt like a woman choosing peace over pain. Days passed, then weeks. I never received another letter, and maybe that was for the best. Forgiveness doesn't always need a reply. Sometimes it's a private decision, a way of saying, I release you, but more importantly, I release myself. The weight on my chest began to lift. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before the trial. My first painting was of a storm, dark, violent, unpredictable. The second was of calm water, the kind that reflects the sky so perfectly it's hard to tell where heaven ends and earth begins. Now, when people ask me about my past, and sometimes they do, curious about the faint sadness in my eyes, I tell them I had a family once. I tell them I lost it to silence, but I found myself in truth. I don't speak their names. I don't speak of courts or headlines. I just say, I learned the hard way that love without honesty is just decoration. Pretty, but hollow. And when I walk along the shore at dusk, I sometimes imagine Daniel standing beside me, not as the man who betrayed me, but as the boy who once promised he'd protect me. Maybe in some quiet way he still does. Because his choices broke me, yes, but they also rebuilt me into someone stronger than I ever was before. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, I want to ask you something. Would you forgive your child after such betrayal? Could you? Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means choosing freedom over bitterness. I used to think freedom meant leaving, running away, cutting ties, starting over. But now I know better. Freedom doesn't come from running away. It comes from finally being seen.